Chapter 1. The Crying That Wouldn't Stop. The night the twins were born, every wolf in the kingdom heard it. Not through their ears, through their bones. A vibration, a pulse, something ancient and cracked open wide beneath the palace walls, beneath the stone, beneath everything anyone thought they understood about the bond. 2 heartbeats, tiny, furious, broken, and no one, not one soul in all of Ashenvale, could make them stop. Not the healers, not the elite nursemaids hand-picked by the court, not even the elders who had spent lifetimes studying the sacred laws of the pack. Every woman who entered that nursery left with scratched arms and hollow eyes. The princes screamed until their throats bled. They arched their backs. They clawed. They refused every scent, every touch, every warm body pressed against them. Because the one scent they needed, the one their newborn wolves were desperately searching for, wasn't there. Their mother had vanished the night of their birth. And the Alpha King? He sat on his throne like a statue carved from grief, refusing to speak, refusing to eat. His mate bond was a blackened, severed thing inside his chest, and the pain of it was so raw, so total, that even his betas could feel it bleeding off him like smoke. Queen Alara had fled with another man. That was what the court whispered. That was what the servants repeated behind closed doors when they thought no one was listening. But whispers don't feed crying princes. And the crying had been going on for 4 days. Down in the kitchens, where the air tasted of grease and smoke and old bread, a girl named Marin moved through the chaos like a ghost. She was small and quiet, the kind of person eyes slid right past without registering. Her hands were cracked from washing dishes in water so cold it burned. Her clothes hung off her frame like something borrowed from a corpse. And her wolf, the one thing every shifter in the kingdom was born with, was nothing. Empty. A blank space where the beast should have lived. They called her wolfless. They called her other things too, but wolfless was the one that cut deepest. Because in a kingdom where the wolf was everything, where it determined your rank, your worth, your very right to exist, Marin had nothing. She scrubbed. She hauled water. She disappeared into the work the way water disappears into sand. No one thanked her. No one saw her. That was the arrangement, and she had learned long ago not to fight it. But tonight, something was different. And the screaming could be heard even here, in the lowest level of the palace. It came through the walls like something alive, like something reaching. Marin stopped scrubbing. Her hands went still in the freezing water. She felt it, not with her ears, not with her mind, somewhere deeper, somewhere she didn't have a name for, a pull. Faint at first, like a thread tied to the center of her chest, being tugged from very far away. She pressed her palm flat against her sternum, frowning. Her heartbeat had changed. It was faster now, sinking to something, 2 somethings. The screaming crescendoed above her, and Marin's breath hitched. She had never been allowed anywhere near the royal nursery. She'd never been allowed near any part of the palace that mattered. She was a kitchen servant, the lowest possible rank, wolfless, invisible. But her feet were already moving. The guard at the nursery door almost stopped her. Almost. But the screaming was so loud, so raw, so utterly broken that even he had stopped caring about protocol. He stepped aside not out of respect, but out of sheer exhaustion. One more failure wouldn't matter. Nothing was working anyway. Marin pushed the door open. The heat hit her first. The room was stifling. Someone had built the fire too high, desperate to soothe. Candles burned on every surface, casting everything in a sickly gold light. And in the center of the room, in a cradle carved from dark wood and lined with the finest furs the kingdom had to offer, 2 infants were tearing themselves apart. Their faces were crimson, their tiny fists clenched so tight their knuckles had gone white. Tears streaked down their cheeks in continuous rivers, And each cry that left their mouths was a sound that didn't belong to babies. It was older than that, wilder, like something primal was clawing its way out of them. Marin stood in the doorway for exactly 3 seconds. Then she crossed the room. She didn't think. There was no calculation in it, no bravery either. It was just instinct. The pull in her chest had become a command, and her body obeyed before her mind could argue. She reached into the cradle. The moment her skin touched the first prince, the older twin, the one born first by mere minutes, the screaming stopped. Just like that, cut off mid-cry as if someone had thrown a switch. The boy's eyes flew open, wide, dark, ancient-looking, even though he was 4 days old, and he looked directly at her. Not through her, at her. His tiny hand closed around her finger. Gentle. Oh, deliberate. Certain. The second prince stopped crying a heartbeat later. His small body went limp with relief, and he turned his face toward Marin's arm, pressing his cheek against her skin like it was the only solid thing in the world. The room went silent. Marin looked down at the 2 small bodies cradled against her, and something inside her chest, that empty, hollow place where a wolf should have been, flickered. Just once, like a candle in a dark room. She didn't hear the door open behind her. She didn't hear the footsteps, heavy, deliberate, the kind that commanded silence just by existing. But she felt the air change. The temperature dropped. The candle flames bent, all of them, toward the door, as if pulled by something heavier than wind, and then a voice. Low, rough, barely controlled. Who is that? It wasn't a question. Marin turned slowly, the princes still pressed against her chest, and found herself looking up into the eyes of Alpha King Dorian. He was taller than she expected, broader. His jaw was clenched so tight she could see the muscle jumping beneath his skin. His eyes, gold, burning gold, the mark of a dominant alpha, were locked, not on her face. They were locked on his sons. On the way they were clinging to her, on the way they had, for the first time in 4 days, stopped crying. Something moved across his expression, something complicated and dangerous, and very, very close to breaking. Marin swallowed. The pull in her chest tightened, and the flicker inside her, the one that shouldn't have been there, burned a little brighter. Chapter 2. The King Who Wouldn't Let Go. The Alpha King stared at a wolfless kitchen servant holding his sons. And for the first time in 4 days, the screaming had stopped. Every instinct in his body was screaming instead. Every protective, territorial, alpha-dominant fiber of his being was howling at him to take his children back, to throw this woman out, to remind everyone in this palace exactly who held the power. But his sons were calm. For the first time since the night they were born, they were calm, and Dorian couldn't bring himself to move. Put them down. His voice came out rougher than he intended, commanding. But there was something underneath it, something cracked and raw that he couldn't quite bury. Marin flinched, not from fear exactly, from the sheer weight of his presence. Alpha Kings didn't just walk into rooms, they filled them. They consumed the air, bent the light, made everything smaller just by existing in the same space. And she was the smallest person in the room. "I can't," she whispered. The words left her mouth before she could stop them, and the moment they did, she felt the blood drain from her face. "You did not tell an Alpha King you couldn't do something. You did not refuse. Not if you wanted to keep breathing." Dorian's eyes narrowed. The gold in them flared brighter. That wasn't a request. But even as he said it, he watched his sons. Watched the way the older twins' fingers were still wrapped around this woman's index finger, tight, possessive. The way the younger one had his face buried in the crook of her neck, breathing her in like she was oxygen. Dorian had seen bonding behavior before. He'd studied it. He was the Alpha King. Understanding bonds was his duty. He had never seen it like this. Not this fast. Not this complete. not in newborns who hadn't even opened their eyes until an hour ago. He took one step forward. Both princes whimpered. He stopped. The sound hit him like a physical blow, his own children recoiling from him, from their father, the alpha, the one who was supposed to be their safe place, their anchor, their first and most fundamental bond, and they were choosing her instead, a wolfless servant girl with cracked hands and fear in her eyes, something dark and ugly twisted in Dorian's gut. Not anger, not entirely, something worse, something that felt dangerously close to the grief he had been drowning in for days. "What did you do to them?" he asked, and this time his voice was quiet. Dangerously so. Maren shook her head. "Nothing, I swear. I didn't do anything. I just touched them, and they—" "Stop." She stopped. Dorian stared at her for a long moment. Then his gaze dropped back to his sons, to the way they were nestled against her like she was the center of their universe. He had spent 4 days watching every skilled healer and trained nursemaid in the kingdom fail. 4 days of screaming that never stopped. 4 days of knowing, with the cold certainty of a man who understood bonds better than anyone alive, that his children were searching for something. He just hadn't been able to figure out what. Now he was looking at it, and he hated it. The court heard within the hour. Maren was pulled from the kitchens and placed under guard. Not as a prisoner, exactly, but not as anything else either. She was given a room adjacent to the nursery, small, sparse, a cot, a wash basin, a single window that looked out onto the courtyard where the servants gathered at dawn. She was told nothing except this: the princes were to remain with her at all times. The whispers started immediately. In the great hall where the court assembled for the evening meal, the elders sat in their carved chairs and spoke in low, furious tones. A wolfless servant, touching the royal heirs, bonding with them, because that was what this was. Everyone could feel it now. A bond, strange and unprecedented and deeply, fundamentally wrong. Wolfless individuals didn't bond. Not like this, not at all. The wolf was the conduit through which all bonds flowed. Without it, there was nothing. No connection, no resonance, no way for one shifter's soul to recognize another. And yet, Lady Cassandra, did the eldest member of the court and the Alpha King's own aunt, rose from her seat and silenced the hall with a single look. "This is unprecedented," she said. Her voice was steady, measured, the voice of someone who had navigated 100 political crises and come out unscathed. "But it is not impossible." She paused. "Let the weight of that settle. The bond is not always what we expect it to be. The old texts speak of bonds that defy rank, bonds that defy reason, bonds that defy even the wolf itself." The hall erupted. Dorian said nothing, but his hands, resting on the arms of his throne, were trembling. That night, Maren couldn't sleep. The princes were finally resting, truly resting for the first time since birth. They lay side by side in the nursery, breathing in the slow, even rhythm of infants who had finally found peace. And Maren sat in the chair beside their cradle, watching them and trying to understand what was happening to her. The flicker was back. That feeling in her chest, in the hollow place where every other shifter carried their wolf, was no longer a flicker. It was a flame now, small, still, but steady, warm, and growing. She pressed her hand against her sternum again and held her breath. Nothing. No shift, no fur, no teeth, no growl rising in her throat. But something was there, something that hadn't been there before tonight. Something that felt impossibly like being seen. She looked down at the princes. The older twin stirred in his sleep. His tiny hand reached out blindly and found the edge of her sleeve. He gripped it, held on, and settled back into stillness. Maren's throat tightened. She had spent her entire life being invisible, being nothing, being the space between people that no one bothered to fill. And these two small, ancient souls had looked at her and decided she was everything. She didn't understand it, but for the first time in her life, she didn't want to run from it. Outside the window, the moon hung full and bright over Ashenvale, and somewhere in the palace, behind a door heavy enough to muffle screams, Alpha King Dorian sat alone in the dark and tried to figure out how a wolfless servant girl had done in an hour what he couldn't do in 4 days, and why, despite everything, despite the court's fury, despite the impossibility of it, despite the fact that it made no sense at all, he hadn't ordered her removed. This is the part where everything starts to crack open. And trust me, what is underneath is going to change everything. To Chapter 3. What the Wolf Remembers 7 Days. For 7 days, Marin lived in the palace, and the flame inside her chest burned brighter every night. She didn't tell anyone. She couldn't. Because if they knew, if the court discovered that the wolfless servant they were already suspicious of was somehow developing something that looked dangerously like a wolf, the consequences would be catastrophic, not for her, for the princes. Lady Cassandra found her on the 8th morning. Marin was in the nursery, as she always was now, sitting cross-legged on the floor while the older prince practiced reaching for her fingers. The younger one, quieter and more watchful, lay on his back studying the candlelight with dark, thoughtful eyes. The old woman appeared in the doorway without a sound. Marin didn't notice her until she spoke. "You feel it, don't you?" It wasn't a question. Marin's hand froze mid-reach. She turned slowly and found Lady Cassandra watching her with an expression that was impossible to read. Not angry, not afraid. Something more complicated than either. "Feel what?" Marin asked, keeping her voice carefully neutral. Cassandra's lips twitched, almost a smile. "Don't insult us both, child." She stepped into the room, moving with the careful grace of someone whose body had aged, but whose mind hadn't. "I have lived 83 winters. I have watched bonds form and shatter and reshape themselves in ways no scholar has ever documented." She stopped 3 feet from Marin and looked down at the princes. "And I have never, in all my years, seen anything like what is happening in this room." Marin said nothing. Cassandra's gaze lifted to meet hers, sharp, piercing, and the kind of look that saw through walls. "The flame," she said softly. Marin's breath caught. "You feel it here." Cassandra touched her own chest precisely over the heart. "It burns. It grows. And you have no idea what it is because you were told your entire life that you were empty, that there was nothing inside you worth finding." The old woman's voice was gentle now, unbearably so. They were wrong. Cassandra sat beside the cradle and spoke in the low, measured tone of someone revealing a secret they had kept for decades. "The wolf is not the only conduit for bonds," she said. "The texts we teach in the academies, the ones that define shifter law, shifter hierarchy, shifter worth, they are incomplete, deliberately so." Marin stared at her. "What do you mean? Deliberately?" "I mean that the Alpha Kings who wrote those texts did not want anyone to know what you are." Cassandra's eyes were steady, calm, like she was discussing the weather. "There are individuals, rare, impossibly rare, who carry something older than the wolf, something that existed before the first shift, before the first pack, before any of it. The old texts call them kindled." The word hung in the air between them. "Kindled," Marin repeated. "A soul that bonds without the wolf, that bonds through something deeper, through the raw, primal essence of recognition, of need." Cassandra glanced at the princes. "Your bond with these children is not an accident, Marin. It is not a malfunction. It is the oldest and most powerful form of connection that exists among our kind, and it terrifies every alpha who has ever held power, because it cannot be commanded. It cannot be broken by rank or authority or force." She leaned forward and her voice dropped lower. It can only be answered. Marin looked down at her hands, the hands that had spent her entire life scrubbing dishes and hauling water and being invisible, the hands that had touched two crying princes and made them stop. "The Alpha King," she whispered. "Does he know?" Cassandra was quiet for a moment. "He suspects," she said finally. "He is not a fool. He has felt the bond between you and his sons. Every alpha in the palace has felt it. It is loud." A ghost of a smile crossed her face. "What he does not know is the full extent of what you are, and I would advise you to keep it that way, for now." "Why?" Cassandra's expression shifted. Something old and cautious moved behind her eyes. "Because there are people in this court who would kill you for it, and there are people who would kill his sons to get to you." She paused. "The Alpha King is the only thing standing between you and both of those outcomes, and right now, he doesn't fully understand what he is protecting." That evening, Dorian summoned Marin to his study. She had never been inside it before. The room was vast. Dark wood, leather-bound books, a fireplace large enough to stand in, maps covered one wall, marked with pins and red thread in patterns she didn't understand. The Alpha King sat behind a desk, carved from a single piece of black stone, and when she entered, he didn't look up immediately. He made her wait. It was a power move, she knew, a reminder of the distance between them, him at the top of everything, her at the very bottom. And when he finally raised his eyes, they were gold again, burning, but quieter than before, less wild. "Sit down," he said. She sat. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind moved through the palace gardens with a sound like breathing. Then Dorian leaned forward, and his voice was low and very careful. "Tell me the truth, all of it. What happens when you touch them?" Marin held his gaze. She thought of Cassandra's warning. She thought of the flame in her chest, burning steadier now than it ever had. She thought of the two small princes who had chosen her, who had, for reasons she was only beginning to understand, bound their souls to hers. And she told him, not everything, not about being kindled, not about the flame or what it might mean or what it might become, but enough. Enough to see the way his jaw tightened, enough to see something shift behind those golden eyes, something that was not anger, not suspicion, but something far more dangerous, recognition. The Alpha King just learned something about the woman his sons won't let go of. And what he is about to do next, it is going to change everything in this palace. Subscribe to Kismet Romance Collection if you haven't already. This story is only getting deeper. Comment. Did Marin make the right call telling him the truth? Or is she walking straight into a trap? And share this because this is the kind of story that stays with you, the kind you need someone else to feel too. Chapter 4. The Bond That Burned Both Ways. The flame inside Marin's chest had a heartbeat now. Not hers, not the prince's. Something else. On something that pulsed in rhythm with the Alpha King's presence, growing hotter every time he was near and settling to a slow, aching ember when he was gone. She didn't understand it, and she was terrified of it, because bonds like this, bonds that reached beyond the children, beyond the nursery, beyond everything she thought she knew, didn't have a name in any text she'd ever seen. They didn't have a name because no one had ever survived one long enough to document it. It started on the 10th night. Marin was asleep in the chair beside the cradle when the dream came. Not a dream, a memory, but not her memory. She was standing in a forest, ancient, dense, the kind of place where the canopy was so thick that sunlight never reached the ground. The air smelled of wet earth and old blood and something else, something electric, like the moment before a storm breaks. And she was not herself. She was smaller, younger, a child, maybe 7 or 8, with bare feet and wild hair and eyes that glowed faintly in the dark. And she was running. Not from something, toward something. The pull was the same as the one she'd felt in the kitchen that first night. That deep, impossible tug in her chest that bypassed thought and went straight to instinct. She ran toward it, her small body moving through the undergrowth with a speed and certainty that shouldn't have been possible. And then she burst through a wall of thorns and into a clearing, and she saw him. A wolf. Massive. Black as the space between stars. Its fur rippled in a wind that didn't exist, and its eyes were gold. The same gold as Dorian's. The wolf looked at her, and the bond snapped into place. Not a thread, not a tether, a bridge, wide and ancient and blazing with light, connecting two points that had always been meant to connect and had simply, somehow, been kept apart. Marin woke up gasping, her hand pressed against her chest, where the flame was burning so bright it almost hurt. Both princes were awake, watching her, their dark eyes reflecting the firelight. The older one reached out his hand. Marin took it, and the flame steadied. She found Dorian in the war room the next morning, alone. He was studying a map, the same kind she'd seen in his study, marked with pins and threads. But this one was different. This one had a single red circle drawn in the center, and inside it a name she didn't recognize. He looked up when she entered, no surprise in his expression, like he'd been expecting her. "You dreamed," he said. And it wasn't a question. Marin's stomach dropped. "How did you—" "I felt it." He set down the pen he'd been holding and turned to face her fully. The gold in his eyes was muted this morning, quieter, almost human. "The bond between you and my sons, it doesn't stay contained to you and them. It reaches. It pulls at everything connected to them." He paused, "Including me." The silence between them was thick enough to choke on. "The dream," he continued, his voice careful now, measured. "A black wolf, a clearing, a bond forming." Marin nodded slowly. Dorian was quiet for a long moment. Then he turned back to the map, and when he spoke again, his voice was lower, rougher. "I had that dream when I was 7 years old." The words landed like a stone dropped into still water. Marin stared at him. "What?" "The same dream, the same clearing, the same bond." He didn't turn around. His shoulders were rigid, every line of his body taut with something she couldn't name. "I dreamed of a child with glowing eyes running toward me through a forest, and when the bond formed—" He stopped, swallowed. "I woke up knowing that somewhere there was someone I was meant to find, someone my wolf recognized before I was old enough to understand what recognition meant." He turned then, and the look on his face was one she had never seen before. Not anger, not authority, not the cold mask of an alpha king. Fear. "I spent 30 years looking," he said quietly, "and I never found you." The court found out that afternoon. Someone had been listening. Marin never found out who. And by the time the sun reached its peak, the entire palace was in chaos. The elders convened an emergency session. The guards doubled around the nursery, and Lady Cassandra appeared at Marin's door with an expression that, for the first time, looked genuinely alarmed. "You told him," Cassandra said, not accusatory, resigned. "He already knew," Marin whispered. "Part of it. The dream. It was his dream, too." Cassandra closed her eyes, breathed. "Then it is worse than I thought," she said. "What do you mean?" The old woman opened her eyes and looked at Marin with something that might have been pity. "The bond between you and his sons is a guardian bond. It exists to protect them. But the dream, the one you shared with Dorian, that is something else entirely." She shook her head slowly. "That is a mate bond." The word hit Marin like a physical strike. "That is impossible," she said. "I am wolfless. Mate bonds require recognition," Cassandra interrupted gently. And you, child, are the most recognizable soul in this kingdom. You always have been. You just didn't know it." Outside, the wind picked up. The flame in Moran's chest burned so bright she could feel it in her fingertips. And somewhere in the palace, Alpha King Dorian stood before his council and made a decision that would change everything. A mate bond between a wolfless servant and the most powerful alpha in the kingdom, and the court is about to find out. Chapter 5. The King Who Chose the Impossible. The council chamber was carved from the oldest stone in the palace. The walls were covered in carvings, ancient wolves mid-shift, alphas crowned in moonlight, bonds depicted as threads of fire connecting two souls across impossible distances. When in the center of it all, Alpha King Dorian stood before 60 of the most powerful shifters in the kingdom and said the one thing none of them expected: "She stays." The eruption was immediate. Elder Thane, the oldest male on the council, was the first to speak. His voice boomed through the chamber like thunder. "She is wolfless. She has no rank, no lineage, no right to exist in this palace, let alone bond with royal heirs." He slammed his fist on the stone table. "This is a violation of every law our kingdom was built on." Dorian didn't flinch. "Then the laws are wrong," he said. The silence that followed was absolute. Thane stared at him. The other elders exchanged glances, some horrified, some calculating, a few carefully blank. Lady Cassandra, seated at the far end of the table, said nothing, but her eyes were sharp and watchful, eye-moving between Dorian and the rest of the council like she was playing a game of chess 3 moves ahead. "The bond is real," Dorian continued. His voice was steady, authoritative, the voice of a king, not a man. "I have felt it myself. Every healer, every elder, every alpha in this room has felt it. My sons have not cried since she touched them. They have not eaten from any other hand. They will not sleep unless she is near." He paused. "Let the weight of it settle. You can question the bond, you can rail against it. You can call it impossible and wrong and a threat to everything we are. But you cannot deny it exists. And you cannot deny that it is the first and only thing in 4 days that has brought my sons peace." Another silence, longer this time. Elder Mara, a woman with silver hair and eyes like storm clouds, leaned forward. "Why, on the mate bond?" she asked. Her voice was quiet, dangerous. "The one between you and the girl, is that real too?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Dorian held her gaze, did not look away, did not hesitate. "Yes," he said. The chamber erupted again. Voices overlapping, arguments colliding, the sound of 60 powerful shifters realizing that their Alpha King had just declared a mate bond with the lowest-ranked individual in the entire kingdom. Dorian let them rage. He had made his decision. They tried to stop it, of course. Elder Thane organized a formal challenge, the ancient right of any elder to oppose an Alpha King's decision through trial. It was rarely invoked. It was even more rarely successful. But Thane was desperate, and desperation made even wise men reckless. The trial was set for 3 days hence. In the meantime, Marin was confined to her room adjacent to the nursery. Not a prisoner, not exactly. But the guards at her door were no longer there to protect her. They were there to keep her from leaving. She sat on the edge of her cot, listening to the princes breathe through the thin wall between their rooms, and tried to process the avalanche her life had become. A mate bond with the Alpha King, the most powerful man in the kingdom, the man who commanded armies, who decided the fate of packs, who could crush her with a single word, and he had stood before his entire council and claimed her. Why? The question burned in her mind. Not because she doubted the bond. She could feel it, after all, burning in her chest like a second heartbeat. But because she couldn't understand why he would fight for it, why he would risk his position, his authority, and his entire dynasty for a woman the court saw as nothing, unless he saw something in her that she couldn't see in herself. The flame pulsed, warm and steady, and for a moment, just a moment, it didn't feel like fear. It felt like hope. The threat came at midnight. Marin was half asleep when the window opened. Not broken, opened. Carefully, silently, the way someone who knew exactly what they were doing would do it. She was on her feet before the figure was fully inside the room. Every nerve in her body was screaming, not from fear, but from something sharper, something instinctive. The flame in her chest flared white-hot, and for one dizzying second she felt something stir in the hollow space inside her, something with teeth. The figure stopped. A man, tall, dark-clothed. A mask covered the lower half of his face, but his eyes were visible, and they were not gold, they were red. In the world of shifters, red eyes meant one thing: a rogue, someone who had been cast out of their pack, someone who had rejected the bonds that held the kingdom together, someone who operated outside every law and every protection the pack structure provided, and someone who was here, in the middle of the palace, in a room guarded by the Alpha King's own soldiers, which meant they had gotten past every single one of them without being detected. The rogue's gaze moved from Marin to the wall, the thin wall between her room and the nursery, and his lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "The kindled," he said. His voice was low, flat, utterly without emotion. "I have been looking for you for a very long time." Marin's hand pressed against her chest, and the flame burned so bright it hurt, and for the first time in her life, something burned back. A rogue in the palace, someone who knows exactly what Marin is, and the flame inside her just fought back. Chapter 6. The Kindled Rises. The rogue moved first, fast, practiced. The kind of speed that came from years of surviving outside the pack, outside the law, outside everything that gave a shifter purpose. He crossed the room in 2 strides, and his hand closed around Marin's throat. She didn't scream. She couldn't. But the flame inside her, the one that had been growing since the night she first touched the princes, the one that had flickered and burned and built itself into something vast and ancient and furious, that flame did not stay quiet. It erupted. The light was blinding. It poured out of Marin like something breaking free after centuries of imprisonment, not shifting, not the way shifters shifted, with cracking bones and rippling fur and the howl of the wolf rising through the blood. This was different. This was older. It started in her chest and radiated outward, through her skin, through the air, through the walls of the room and into the corridor beyond. The guards outside felt it like a wave of heat, like standing too close to a bonfire. They stumbled back, hands over their eyes, unable to look directly at the source. The rogue felt it too. His grip on her throat loosened. His red eyes went wide, not with fear exactly, but with something close to it. Recognition. The look of someone who had been hunting for something and had just realized, too late, exactly how dangerous their prey was. Marin looked up at him, and her eyes were no longer dark. They were gold, bright, burning, blazing gold. The same gold as Dorian's, the same gold that marked dominance, authority, power. The rogue released her and stumbled backward. Marin stood. She didn't feel afraid. She didn't feel confused or overwhelmed or lost. For the first time in her entire life, she felt complete. The hollow space inside her, the one she had been told was empty, that had made her less than, that had been used to justify every cruelty the world had ever inflicted on her, was full, not with a wolf, with something older, something that the wolf itself was afraid of. The rogue tried to run. He made it to the window, the same one he'd used to enter, before Marin's voice stopped him cold. "Who sent you?" It wasn't a question. It wasn't the voice of a kitchen servant. It was low, resonant, layered with something that vibrated in the air like the aftermath of a bell struck in an empty cathedral. The rogue turned. His red eyes were flickering, unstable. The presence Marin was radiating was affecting him the way an alpha's command affected an omega, irresistibly, fundamentally. "Elder Thane," he said. The words came out before he could stop them. Compelled. "He paid me to take the princes, separate them from you, break the bond." "It can't be broken," Marin said. The rogue laughed, short, hollow. "No, it can't." He looked at her, really looked for the first time, and something in his expression shifted, something almost like wonder. That is why he wanted the princes dead instead. The words landed like a blade. From the corridor, the sound of running footsteps, shouting, the guards alerted by the light, by the energy, by the sheer impossible presence that Marin was now radiating like a second sun. And then the door burst open, and Dorian was there. He took in the scene in a single breath. The rogue, Marin, the light still pulsing faintly from her skin, the gold in her eyes. His expression didn't change. He crossed the room in 3 strides, seized the rogue by the collar, and slammed him into the wall hard enough to crack the stone. The rogue went limp immediately, not from the force, but from the alpha's command, flooding through the contact like electricity. Dorian turned to Marin, and for the first time, there was no fear in his eyes. No confusion, no calculation, just recognition. "There you are," he said softly. Elder Thane was arrested before dawn, and the evidence was damning. The rogue talked freely once the alpha's command held, spilling everything. Thane had orchestrated the plot from the beginning, not just the assassination attempt, everything. The court's resistance to Marin, the challenges to Dorian's authority, the whispers that had spread through the palace like poison. Thane had known what Marin was, kindled, the rarest and most powerful form of bond-bearer in the history of their kind, and he had spent decades ensuring that no one else knew, ensuring that individuals like her were found and eliminated before they could threaten the power structure that alphas had built over centuries. He had failed. The trial that had been set for 3 days hence was canceled. Dorian declared Marin's status formally, publicly, before the entire court, not as a servant, not as an anomaly to be studied or feared, as his mate. The court's reaction was divided, as expected. Some bowed immediately, those who understood that the Alpha King's word was law and that arguing it would only lead to their own destruction. Others resisted quietly for a while longer, but resistance, like grief, has a half-life. And Marin's presence in the palace, calm, quiet, steady, radiating that warmth that seemed to touch everyone who came near her, wore it down faster than any command could have. The princes grew, they thrived. They clung to Marin with the fierce, unshakable certainty of children who had found their anchor. And they clung to Dorian too, slowly at first, then with increasing confidence, as the Alpha King learned, day by day, how to be not just their father, but something softer, something present. Lady Cassandra watched it all from her corner of the court and said very little. But one evening, when Marin found her alone in the garden, the old woman looked up at her with an expression that was, for once, entirely unguarded. "You know," Cassandra said, "the last kindled was documented 400 years ago. They disappeared, all of them, hunted down by the alphas who feared what they represented." She paused. "A bond that couldn't be controlled, a power that didn't answer to rank." Her eyes drifted to the palace where the light from the nursery windows glowed warm and golden in the darkening sky. "You are the first one in 4 centuries to survive long enough to matter," she said. "Don't waste it." Marin looked at the palace, and at the life she had stumbled into, not through power or ambition or any of the things the world told her she needed to have, through a pull, a flame, a bond that had been waiting for her since before she was born. She pressed her hand against her chest. The flame burned steady, and somewhere inside her, in the place that had been empty for so long, something ancient and golden and indestructible opened its eyes. And that is where we leave her, standing at the threshold of everything she was always meant to become. But trust me when I tell you, this story is not over, not even close. The bonds we have seen are only the surface. What is underneath, what Marin is truly capable of, what Dorian is truly willing to fight for. That story is just beginning. If you have made it this far, if this story has stayed with you, and if Marin's journey has meant something to you, then you already know what to do. Subscribe to Kismet Romance Collection, like this video, and leave a comment. Tell me, do you believe Marin and Dorian's story is the greatest bond ever told? Or is there something even bigger waiting for them? This is not just a channel. This is a community, a place for stories that leave you breathless, and you belong here. Share this with someone who needs to feel it too, because the best stories are not meant to be carried alone. Until next time, stay wild, stay bonded, stay with Kismet.